I call this meeting to order now and welcome everyone to meeting 94 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room or remotely using the Zoom application. We have two currently, Ms. Dillon and Mr. Koto. Good to see you both here this morning. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants of this meeting, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is, of course, not permitted. Proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. And as you know, although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur, and you all know then to keep your phones away from the microphones as we go. So, okay, we'll open the meeting with committee business. Ms. Thomas, I saw your hand up first. Point of order?
I just would like, through you, to have the clerk confirm. We had CRTC scheduled to come today. There are very, very important questions that need to be asked of the CRTC, including regulations, telecom companies, Canadians are being gouged, the massive influx of disinformation from the Fox propaganda network and others. Those are all important questions. Can you confirm that we've, because of the Conservative filibuster, we've had to cancel the CRTC appearance yet again? You'll recall a couple of years ago we had to delay for an hour CRTC.
Yeah, I was surprised too, Mr. Julian. I expected to see Ms. Treaties here today, but I saw committee business and no mention of the CRTC chair. We have a new clerk here today because Genevieve, as you can see on, she's not feeling well today and couldn't join us in person. But Jacques Maziad is with us here today. And the request, Ms. Treaties, she was scheduled to appear here today, so.
As far as I know, this is the only thing.
Yeah, okay. You know, Mr. Julian, I don't know what happened. I do agree with you. When I did see the notice come out on committee business, I actually I thought myself that Mr. Treaties would be at least 1 hour here today, but that has not happened for some reason. But I will give that to the chair and we'll move forward. But a very good point of order because I too was expecting to see the head of the CRTC here today. So thank you for that. Does that satisfy you?
Well, I may come back to this issue.
Yeah.
We're currently in camera.
Oh, I thought we were public.
Yeah, we are.
We're in public.
Okay, if
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
then we because the committee notice says in camera. So if we're in public,
Yes.
I would want to say this is the second time because of Conservative filibusters that we've had to delay or cancel the CRTC appearance. And I find it very regrettable that Conservative filibusters
Yeah,
are
this
blocking.
one, though, I'm going to say to you, Mr. Julian, this was out of our hands. I mean, it was on the schedule to have the CRTC chair with us today. And I have no reason why Ms. Treaties did not show.
Well, you'll recall the last time the CRTC came, a Conservative filibuster
it's debate,
delayed.
I think,
The
Mr.
CRTC
Julian.
was waiting outside
Yeah.
while a Conservative filibuster was dedebating
But
having the CRTC
committee
before the committee.
business-
It was bizarre. It was
Yeah.
like it's just like
That's
some
fine.
kind of
Okay?
bizarre, dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to note that this is the second time the CRTC has canceled or delayed because
But they didn't
of a
cancel
Conservative
because
filibuster.
of one side filibustering. Today's business should have been Ms. Treaties. And I have no reason why Ms. Treaties wasn't on today's agenda. I asked the same question to our group yesterday. So, to be honest with you, I have the same issue that you have. But it's not because of any filibusters going on. Today, committee business was scheduled for the head of the CRTC to be with us today. So I appreciate your motion.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président, à mon tour.
Point of order. Point of order.
Okay, Mr. Shampoo, do you want to speak on yeah, okay.
Oui,
So
tout à
go
fait.
ahead.
Yes. I note that Mr. Julian is drawing a parallel between the filibuster that had taken place and was done by our Conservative colleagues at the last invitation to the CRTC, but that's not the same thing. Let me finish, please.
Monsieur le Président,
Thank you, Mr.
Je suis
Thank you,
en
Mr.
train de
Chair.
faire mon point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Chair, I am in the middle of my point of order. If I could have my colleagues' attention, please. Mr. Chair, I would like to know whether we can ask the clerk to explain to us what happened in the invitation order for today.
This is debate.
Non,
this is
c'est un point d'ordre. Je veux
this is
connaître
ridiculous.
de la
This
part
is debate.
Monsieur le Président, si Madame...
Okay, here's the ruling I'm going to make right now. Hold on. Mr. Shampoo, finish your
Merci.
comments, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Thomas.
Je voudrais
Mr.
savoir,
Shampoo,
Monsieur le
and
Président,
yeah, I've got Mr. Koto, I have Ms. Gladue, we have a lineup here. So,
Yes.
go ahead.
qu'on me laisse finir avant de déterminer que ce n'est pas un...
Let me finish before determining whether or not this is a point of order. I would like to know whether we can ask the clerk to explain to us what happened so that the agenda of today was amended. I would like a clarification from the clerk. If the clerk in attendance has the information, perhaps our regular clerk is on Zoom, on virtual. Maybe we can be informed as to what's happened. Why is this non-appearance of Ms. Estrides?
Okay, according to our new clerk, it has been rescheduled at the direction of the chair. So the chair made the decision to move Ms. Atreides to another date. I don't know the date. We haven't decided that, but the chair has decided that.
Merci.
So if I continue on, I've got to go to Mr. Koto.
Is he on the point?
My hand's down now.
Are you
Mr. Chair,
okay? Thank you. To the point of order, Ms. Thomas, and then Ms. Gladue.
I believe Ms. Gladue
Okay,
had her
Ms.
hand up
Gladue,
first.
go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. What I would say is thank you for clarifying that it was rescheduled based on the chair that normally occupies the seat. It was my understanding that you did not even know you were going to be chair until this morning. And so I think for Mr. Julian to falsely accuse the Conservatives being responsible for this, that he should withdraw those comments. Thank you.
Mr. Julian.
I certainly will not. The record stands in terms of the delay around the CRTC a couple of years ago was unbelievable to me. And my comments
talking
today
about this meeting
and
today.
my comments today are absolutely appropriate, given that for the last 3 days, when we should have been considering safe sports and recommendation to protect athletes and the public in safe sports, we have been consumed by a Conservative filibuster. And the Conservatives need to admit that. They need to come clean.
Point of order.
Point of order, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Julian likes to sit at this table and try to belittle the members of the Conservative team. Most of his belittling is targeted at me. It's unfortunate, as a male colleague, that he finds it enjoyable to go after a younger female colleague.
Point of
Right
order.
now, he is doing exactly that. And it is inappropriate. It is not a point of order that he is
Point of
raising,
order.
but
I
rather
think
he
this
is
is
taking an
also debate,
opportunity
which is
to
what
debate.
Madam
Mr. Chair,
Thomas
I would
was
ask
opposing in the
that
first
you would
place.
bring the debate to a close
Well, I would
and that we
like
would
to.
resume with the business of this meeting.
Yeah, if we could. I have 2 point of orders here in front of me, but I do want to bring everyone together here and get going on business here today if we can. Mr. Julian, you were first up for point of order, and then Ms. Hepner, and then I'd like to go with the speaking order that we have here and continue today.
Mrs. Thomas knows full well that I have immense respect for her. I compliment her experience
Point of order.
and the fact
Point
that
of order.
she has been.
Point of order.
She
Point
has
of order.
been a
Point of
committee
order.
chair.
Point of order.
I deplore
Point
the
of order.
tactics of the
Point of order.
Conservatives, and I will
Point of
continue
order.
to deplore the
Point of
tactics
order.
of the Conservatives.
Point of
They are
order.
not in the public interest.
Point of order.
Thank you. Okay.
Point of order.
Ms. Thomas.
Yeah, he cannot assume what Mrs. Thomas knows full well. It's an incredibly demeaning statement to start that way. And I would ask that he would rein in his tongue and show me some respect as an equal.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I was not the one who said I'm going to make this committee hell, which is what Mrs. Thomas said at the
Okay.
last meeting.
Okay, let's move on. Ms. Hepner, anything else to add here then?
I would like to support Mr. Julian's comments,
Okay.
and I think it's fair what he has said, given
Okay.
the conduct of other members of this committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go back now. You wanted to speak, Ms. Thomas. I did read the intro of this. You had your hand up. The clerk has noticed that you were the first one to have your hand up, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'll be moving a motion for consideration at this committee, and I would like it to be considered immediately, given that we are currently in committee business. The motion reads as follows. This committee condemns the CBC for publishing a false headline based on disinformation from Hamas, a criminal terrorist organization, that incorrectly stated Israel was responsible for the explosion of Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza that resulted in the deaths of innocent civilians, and given that the Prime Minister, the Minister of National Defense, the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France have all concluded this claim is false. The committee calls on the CBC to apologize to the Jewish community and all Canadians for spreading this dangerous disinformation, and to publicly correct the record and to report this finding to the House of Commons.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Has anyone,
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I do have further comments to
Okay,
make.
go ahead then.
However, for the benefit of the committee, I am happy to allow the motion to be distributed
Yes, we'd
first,
like
and then
that.
we can continue with discussion.
Okay.
I would like it noted, however, that I am not ceding the floor. I do have further comments to make.
okay, that's fine, but we do need copies for everybody. So it's the will of the committee then to suspend for a couple of moments, just to get copies distributed to everybody here. So we'll take 3 or 4 minutes suspension here. We're back.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Ready to resume.
Point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Shampoo.
Je veux comprendre, Monsieur le Président.
Chair, I would like to understand the procedure that Ms. Thomas has just undertaken. Ms. Thomas had the floor. I would like clarification. Were we debating the motion on the table at the last meeting, or is this a new conversation that has begun today? If this has been a new conversation today, Chair, I would like you to confirm the speaking order. I think there has to be a list of speakers, and I would like to know under what right Ms. Thomas had the floor, if it was a continuation of the last meeting or if it was a new round, because we're still dealing with the amendment of that ended the last meeting.
So Mr. Shampoo, she asked prior to speaking on this. So, you know, last time it was adjourned, it wasn't suspended. Okay, I was here for that meeting on Tuesday, and so it was the chair actually that thought we were going to resume, actually on my sub-amendment. That was her interpretation. My interpretation is a little bit different because I thought we adjourned and start over. And actually, that's why I kind of thought committee business today was going to be the CRTC. But it wasn't because, as you saw in the notice, the committee business had nothing for today. So that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Sur mon rappel au règlement.
Regarding my point of order, and I'm going to try to be clear in my question. If I've understood correctly, the CRTC who should have appeared is not going to appear, but Tuesday's meeting was not suspended, it was adjourned. So that if we're there, it is because there was an error in procedure. Is that correct?
C'est le fun.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Chair, I have enormous respect for you. You do remarkable work as a parliamentarian, but I can't agree with your interpretation of things. We were, as we have been over the last 3 meetings, engaged in the motion that was presented by Mrs. Thomas, and your sub-amendment was before this table. We don't start again afresh. That would be a misinterpretation of the rules. So with respect, I'll have to challenge your interpretation. I think where we are at is, as you mentioned, your sub-amendment. And I would certainly hope, and that's a sub-amendment to my amendment, I'm hoping that we can get on with the safe sports study. And I'm certainly willing to withdraw my amendment. I hope Mrs. Thomas is willing to withdraw hers so that we can get on to safe sports. I think there are some other ideas in terms of a study that we can do, but I don't agree with this interpretation that somehow we're starting afresh, but that Mrs. Thomas still has a continuation from the previous meeting. So with deep respect, because you do, I think, a remarkable job, I will have to challenge your ruling.
On that point, Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I
Novello?
believe Mr. Julian had the floor on a point of order, and I do not believe he can move to challenge the chair on a point of order. That was my recollection of what had just happened. Just wanted to.
Well, to be honest with you, Mr. Julian didn't have a point of order. I never heard him say point of order after Mr. Shampoo. He just, had a few comments, took the floor by himself. So, thank you, Mr. Julian. But when we started, after I read the opening remarks, Ms. Thomas had her hand up, and then we proceeded. We didn't, it was assumed, and I did not, I will admit, I did not assume once we adjourned that we were going to pick up on the sub-amendment from on Tuesday. So Ms. Thomas has the floor. She raised her hand first. I have Ms. Thomas. Ms.
Point
of order,
ruling.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Mr. Julian was challenging, and that should take us to a vote, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
She's challenging. Did you want me to explain that? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to let the clerk explain the procedure going forward here.
Okay, the challenge of the decision of the chair is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? If you say yes, it means that we'll continue with Ms. Thomas and her motion. If the committee says no, the decision is overturned, and we're going back to square one, if I can say that. Okay? Everybody understand?
Any questions on this, Mr. Shampoo?
On retourne où exactement?
So where do we go back to? Or back to the sub-amendment? Or back to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order.
Here's Ms. Thomas. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, according to the standing orders and according to your chairmanship, I had the floor. The reason I was given the floor was because this is a whole new meeting. It's a business meeting. and I was the first one with my hand up and therefore acknowledged by the chair. I then moved a motion. It is not required to pick up this meeting where the last one left off because the last meeting was not suspended, it was adjourned. So I moved my motion. Now, Mr. Julian doesn't like my motion, and so he would like to take control of this meeting. Mr. Chair, Peter Julian was on a point of order when he moved a motion to challenge you, which I believe, if you confer with the clerk, is not permitted, and I would just like confirmation on that.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. We've got a couple of point of orders here. Let me just confer with the clerk for a second. Mr. Koto, you were first. Mr. Koto, go ahead.
We know that point of orders cannot be debated, so let's get to the vote, Mr. Chair.
Other point of order, Mr. Julian, I think you also had your hand up on. I could be wrong.
I would just ask through you to Ms. Thomas that she refer to all members respectfully. I realize she said she wanted to turn the committee into hell, but she still needs to be respectful of each member of this committee, and I would ask you to enforce that, please.
Okay. We'd like to suspend for 2 minutes with the clerk. We're just going to confer, if you don't mind, everyone. The meeting here, I am going to let the clerk read out the interpretation. And we spent some time going through the video of what was said. And so I'm just going to let the clerk read out what it says.
In the book, page 1062, a member of a committee may move a motion at any time in the normal course of a meeting, provided that the member has the floor to move the motion and is not doing so on a point of order. The question is, was the chair will decide if it was a point of order or not.
So we went through the video from Mr. Shampoo to Mr. Julian, and there was no point of order.
Point of order? Okay, Mr.
Now there
Chair.
is a point of
yeah,
order.
Mr. Chair.
You can't even let me finish here, but go ahead.
Let's not delay this any further. I challenge your interpretation.
Point of order.
The reference that the clerk just gave isn't the issue that was raised by Mr. Shampoo and myself, which is that we had a sub-amendment on the floor that the chair of the committee had foreseen that continues, as it has for the last 3 meetings. This has been the normal committee practice. And so that motion was on the floor. And yes, Mrs. Thomas still had the floor, there's no doubt, but on your sub-amendment. And so that is what I'm challenging in terms of interpretation. And
the challenge, though, Mr. Julian, if you would have said point of order, then it comes back to me, and you would not have the floor. It would have gone back to the original motion that Ms. Thomas made when we came in here. So that's why we went through the video, to see, in fact, if your point of order after Mr. Shampoo, which it wasn't. You never said point of order.
I did.
Oh, you did say point of order?
And I did.
Oh, well,
And
then that
you
changes
referenced me.
everything. Sorry?
Yeah.
That will change everything. Then it's up to me to decide under this, right? Where we go next.
Subject to, I'm challenging your ruling, with respect. I think
No,
you did
that's
very good
fine.
work as
That's why
chair.
we went through the video. Now you're telling me you said a point of order.
I'm saying that I am challenging your decision,
Yeah.
and I think the committee should decide whether or not they uphold your ruling.
Yeah. Ms. Thomas, you had Mr. Koto, is your hand still up? Well, I see it's still up, but are you wanting to speak to this? Okay, thank you. Ms. Thomas.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, that's fine.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, there's a couple of problems here. If I may have your attention, I'll just wait.
So because, Mr. Julian, we're going to come back here. Ms. Gladue, just let me say one thing. Because Mr. Julian has said, he said a point of order, you can't, as the clerk said, you can't
Move a motion,
you can't move a motion on a point of order.
and the motion was that he was challenging you.
And the motion was that you were challenging the chair. So you can't do that.
It's a dilatory motion.
Yeah, and you can't do that under the book as the clerk just read. So I'm going to go back, if you don't mind. Ms. Thomas had the floor, and I'm going to try to bring everyone together if I can.
Point of order.
Point of order, or you?
Point of order.
Yeah.
You've had both Mr. Shampoo and myself raise concerns. Your
I've heard the
ruling
concerns.
we are challenging, and yes, as you know, the practice in the committee, and the chair has been very good about this. I think every time that a ruling is challenged, it often comes from the Conservatives. The chair moves immediately to. Should the decision of the chair be sustained? That's a very simple procedure. It's something that has been practiced in our committee for as long as I've been on this committee. And so I'm simply challenging your interpretation with respect, because I believe you do a very good job, so the committee can make that decision as to whether or not they believe that your interpretation is the right one.
Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Juste
Thank you, Chair. Just one comment. I'd like this to be properly understood by the committee and that it be public. We are having this conversation because there was a procedural error in the invitation to this meeting, and there was a confusion about the understanding of today's agenda. I don't want us to correct one error with another, And that's why I would like to respect the standing order and have a decision that is not a partisan decision and that there not be another procedural error and we have a fair decision. That is why I wanted to have an exact idea of what we are doing, an accurate idea, so that we not make another mistake. My impression in beginning this meeting today was that in the absence of the CRTC, it's because we had suspended the previous meeting, which was not the case, and Madam Thomas still had the floor on her sub-amendment that was being debated at the last meeting, which does not seem to be the case. So there's confusion, and I think this should be corrected and things should be done properly. Now there's a new motion being tabled, to my mind. This was being tabled when we were debating another motion, which is not receivable. So I want things to be clear for everybody. We don't correct an error by making another error.
I'm going to get the interpretation from the clerk. We've been in a brief discussion here. So, Jacques, if you don't mind, in French, because Mr. Champoux has asked the question, and we've looked at the Green Book here, and we have a decision.
Okay. Je vais expliquer ma perception.
I'd like to explain my perception of the chair's decision in the current context. He opened the meeting and began by explaining the rules of procedure because of the virtual meeting, and then we came to the committee business section. Before resuming debate on the motion, which was being discussed in committee last time, Ms. Thomas asked for the floor. The chair recognized her, and she made her motion. What I would simply like to say is that as long as the committee has not resumed debate on the motion from the last meeting, the floor is open to be able to discuss. This is what I understand that the chair did in the chronology of the events as they occurred, because as the chair has explained, the motion last time, the debate on the last motion was adjourned. So the committee did not have to resume debate on that motion necessarily. It could resume debate on anything else. That is my interpretation of the situation that is now occurring.
So you've got the ruling here, okay? Very quickly.
Je comprends, mais
I understand. But what about the non-appearance this morning of the chair of the CRTC, which is added to this confusion? And this is why we find ourselves in this unique situation where we're being taken by surprise because we all interpreted that the absence of the CRTC meant that we were continuing the debate on the sub-amendment. I understand that rather than suspending the last meeting, it was adjourned, and so now we start from scratch. But I would like to point out that this confusion is the result of an error and poor communication, and I wish for it to not recur.
Documented. Ms. Gladue, you're actually on the list first.
Yes.
And then Mr.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I appreciate the clerk's explanation of how we got here. And so then Ms. Thomas had the floor. And then there was a point of order from Mr. Champoux. And you can interrupt somebody that has the floor with a point of order. And then there was a point of order from Mr. Julian, which, again, you can interrupt Rachel Thomas, who had the floor. And then, on a point of order, Mr. Julian tried to challenge the chair, which is a dilatory motion. And I don't believe that you can make a motion on a point of order. And so that's where we are today. And so I think you're correct that what we need to do is return then to the person that had the floor, which is Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. I am going to give Mr. Noor Mohammed, you've had your hand up for a little while now, so the floor is yours for a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the greatest of respect, this has nothing to do with points of order or not. Decisions by the chair, everyone says, are not debatable, but according to the book, they can be appealed to the committee. To appeal a decision by the chair, the committee must inform the committee of his intent to do so, his or her intent to do so, which Mr. Julian did. There is an expectation then that the chair will call that to a vote to determine whether or not the chair's ruling will be upheld or not. This has nothing to do with points of order, and while Ms. Gladue's timeline may or may not be accurate, it's not relevant to the point that Mr. Julian just made. And that is the reality that we have to operate in right now. So, in fact, there was a request to challenge the ruling of the chair that that it has nothing to do with points of order. It doesn't matter. He made the request.
Okay, we've heard from the clerk. I'm going to proceed. Ms. Thomas, you have...
Point of order. Mr.
Julian,
Chair,
yeah?
I have challenged your ruling. With respect, you now have to go to the committee.
No, I
and
don't.
This is, you absolutely do. You
We just
absolutely
did
do.
check the
no,
Green Book.
No. It's, Mr. Chair, with respect, when the chair is challenged, and that has been practice in this committee, and the chair of the committee, with all due respect to her, has allowed those challenges on points of order that come primarily from Conservatives. And this has been a practice that is ingrained in our committee and our committee practices. So with respect, I disagree with your interpretation, and I would like you to submit that to the committee. That is your responsibility as chair.
Yeah. Mr. Julian, I'm going to override you here. The decision was, we're going to go back.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. You cannot override a challenge to the chair. You simply have to ensure that that
can't
question.
make the challenge on the point of
yes, you
order.
can, and this has been our practice throughout this time. And I believe, Mr. Chair, yourself in the position of vice chair have challenged on a point of order a chair's decision. So this is something that has been our practice in committee. Respectfully, I ask again, I'm challenging your ruling. Yep. Will you ask the committee whether they sustain your ruling or not?
Yeah, we're just going to, I'm just conferring with the clerk for a second. I know we've had lots of suspensions. I'm just going to suspend for 2 minutes to get the official. We've gone through the Green Book, but thank you, Mr. Julian. Just give me 2 minutes to collect our thoughts here. Decisions to make here as we're going around in circles. Thank you, everyone, this morning. I really appreciate this. So in the Green Book on page 1059, it states, decisions of the chair and appeals. One of the primary responsibilities of a committee chair is to determine the procedural and admissibility of matters raised in committee and whether the committee business is conducted in accordance with proper procedure, which we've been talking about. The chair makes such decisions on his or her own initiative or following a point of order raised by a member. Decisions by the chair are not debatable. They can, however, be appealed to the committee. So to appeal a decision by a chair, a member must inform the committee of his or her intent immediately after the decision is announced. The chair then asks the committee the following question: shall the decision of the chair be sustained? And then on page 1062, we were just talking about the motion is not a substantive motion or a subsidiary motion where such a motion is already being debated. And in brackets, it says a committee is required to deal with such motions at a time. The member has the floor to move the motion and is not doing so on a point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Julian.
What you've just read out confirms what I've been saying, which
Well, there's
is
an
raising
interpretation.
it. No, and I'll come to practice in a moment. But immediately after the decision of the chair, Mr. Champoux raised a point of order. You declared your decision. I immediately after that decision challenged the decision of the chair. As you say, and you just read it out. You just read it out.
I also read out
exactly what I was
1062.
saying. Immediately after, and you go immediately to the committee to ask, should the decision of the chair be sustained? That has been our practice. And you'll recall, Mr. Chair, at our last meeting, the Conservatives did it a number of times on points of order. So this has been a practice of our committee since the beginning. It is confirmed by the Green Book. So I ask again, I am challenging your ruling for a number, I think, of very valid reasons. And I would ask you that you ask the committee whether your decision will be sustained or not.
Ms. Thomas.
There's a motion on the floor that I moved with regard to the CBC spreading dangerous disinformation pertaining to Hamas and Israel.
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Noor Mohammed.
The ruling of the question related with respect to the ruling of the chair is not one that can be debated. There should be a decision put to the committee. The committee has the will to sustain the chair's ruling or not. And I don't know why we are afraid of doing that, given we have done that. We did it 3 times last meeting alone. So we could perhaps dispense with this, just get it over with, and then we can go back to whatever we need to do.
Point of order, Ms. Thomas.
The motion on the floor was brought forward by me, and it's to look in, the motion is to call on the CBC.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Julian.
It's not an order, and that is what I'm challenging. It's up to the committee to decide whether or not the sudden change procedurally is in order or not. So I would just simply ask you,
point of
as we
order.
have so many times before, that you simply ask whether the decision of the chair should be sustained. This is a fundamental right of committee members to challenge you in a respectful way with no debate, and the committee will decide whether or not they sustain your ruling. I disagree with it, but there's no debate on this. You simply have to put that to the floor. Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Please do so.
Okay, we're going around in circles. We all love circles on a Thursday, but I will let it go, the decision. Go ahead for the vote.
The chair be sustained. If you vote yes, it means that the decision stays. If you vote no, the decision will be overturned. Mr. Coteau.
So no is not to support the chair, correct?
Correct.
So no.
Ms. Dillon.
No.
Ms. Gainey. Ms. Sepsner.
No.
Mr. Noor Mohammed. Ms. Thomas.
For the sake of the Jewish community in Canada and all people who pay $1.4 billion to the CBC for its propagation of false information, I
Rappel
vote
le
no.
règlement, Monsieur le Président. C'est
I
oui
vote
ou non
yes.
dans un
Point
vote.
of order.
She votes yes.
Yeah. Ms. Gladue.
Yes.
Mr. Melillo. Yes. Monsieur Champoux.
Oui.
Mr. Julian.
No.
Nays 6, yeas 4. My decision is overturned. Ms. Gladue.
So then I move that we return to talking about the sub-amendment where we left off in the previous meeting. I'm very disappointed on the one hand because I think it's clear that CBC, even after a week and a half, hasn't retracted their story. We saw the Prime Minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister, all this disinformation out there suggesting that Israel had bombed a hospital when in fact the information came from Hamas. So I can't believe the committee doesn't want to talk about that and get the CBC to retract their story. But that said, we were talking previously about a similar issue with CBC, and I think in light of Canadian press this morning coming in and having to retract 3 false statements about our Conservative leader, I think this is a timely topic. So I think we were talking about the sub-amendment that was made to Mr. Julian's amendment. And so what I would say is I think it's important to make sure that we have Catherine Tate come to committee for 2 hours specifically to talk about the issue that was in this same motion today, about the false story, about the directives of how journalists should not refer to Hamas as terrorists, even though it's legal, and that we should somehow make sure that we distinguish between that and what we're going to talk about with Ms. Tate when she's already scheduled to come, which is we're supposed to be talking about her mandate. And I have quite a number of questions to ask about her mandate because there have been numerous articles that have done statistical analysis and come to the conclusion that CBC is left-leaning, and in many cases they are not reporting to Canadians accurately. And I think that that is not freedom of the press. It is a very dangerous trend. And so I think in my discussion, I would support very much Mr. Waugh's previous amendment to say Catherine Tate for 2 hours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. Just to inform everyone around the table, the clerk or the former chair, the chair that isn't here today, had a speaking list, but I have a new speaking list in front of me because we adjourned from last meeting, okay? So there's a difference, and we adjourned the meeting, so we start a new speaking list, if you don't mind, Mr. Noor Mohammed. So that's what I've done, okay? And so we just had Ms. Gladue. I've got Ms. Thomas, Mr. Malello, Mr. Julian, and Mr. Noor Mohammed, and Mr. Koto. And Okay, Ms. Hepner? And Ms. Gainey? No? Oh, yeah, okay. I think, if you don't mind me saying, Mr. Cotto had his hand up before you, if you don't mind. So, Ms. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, perhaps it would be best to start here. I just would like to point out a procedural thing. While I respect my colleague, Ms. Gladue, and her bringing forward my motion for discussion, I believe that if you look at the Green Book, that's actually not permitted. Because the motion is mine, I am the only one that can move it, unless, of course, someone is officially subbed in for me, at which point then that individual can move it. So in order to bring us back in under the procedure that is described in the Green Book, I will move my motion for discussion
Point of order.
at this point in time.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
We made the decision as committee. We are back on your sub-amendment. That is something that the committee decided based on what has been committee practice since as long as I've been on Canadian Heritage. So it is out of order and inappropriate for any member of this committee to try to move three different motions through the course of this meeting. This is simply not appropriate procedurally. And so given that we have made the decision, it is back on your sub-amendment, as Ms. Gladue said very appropriately. I would ask you to ensure that all members are speaking to your sub-amendment because that is what is before us on the table. That's what Conservatives moved, and that's what we've been debating for the last 3 meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. I agree. We're debating, Ms. Thomas, if you don't mind me saying, the sub-amendment put forth because we're back
the motion is
here.
on the floor. You can't debate the sub-amendment without me moving the motion.
No, I was defeated on a challenge of 6-4 that we would go back to committee business and resume debate on the sub-amendment from Tuesday. So I have a speaking list here. You just happen to be first up now. Ms. Gladue did sneak in. Maybe she shouldn't have, but I let her. And then now we're with you, and then Mr. Malello, and then Mr. Julian, if you don't mind. So we're talking about the sub-amendment from Tuesday, if you don't mind. My sub-amendment to Mr. Julian's. Is everything clear as mud here?
Tape for tape.
Mr. Julian.
I have the floor.
Yeah, and then Ms. Thomas.
Just, I think it might be useful, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
if clerk just read your sub-amendment on
Yep.
the record. If folks, some folks around the table need a refresher on what is actually before us.
I have it right here in front of me. It would be,
It's here in blue.
yeah, okay. So I'll read it out. If those of you that were around Mr. Malello, I know you weren't here. So given that Hamas has been declared a terrorist organization by the government of Canada since 2002, and point 2, horrific Hamas terrorist attack against Israel left thousands of innocent people dead and injured, and point 3 now changes that both the European Union and U.S. lawmakers have raised concerns about false and misleading content about the Israel-Hamas conflict being spread. And then, point 4, the CBC receives $1.4 billion in public funding, and Meta and Google and other media platforms receive over $1 billion in indirect subsidies annually through taxpayer dollars, and that this committee has a mandate to review government expenditures. And then we go on for the committee that the committee invite Rachel Curran, head of public policy, Meta Canada, to come before the committee and summon the president of CBC, Catherine Tate, to appear for 2 hours by herself within 7 days of the motion being adopted. And then we have H, invite the CBC Director of Journalistic Standards, George Achi, and the CBC Ombudsman, Jack Nagler, to appear separately for a minimum of an hour and a half each to address the CBC's position on journalistic standards and practices. This is the sub-amendment that we are currently going to debate.
Point of order.
Got a choir here. Go ahead, Mr. Noor Mohammed.
With respect to process, based on the ruling of the overturning of the ruling of the chair, if just going back now to page 1062 of the Green Book, just so that we're all clear in terms of the speaking list specifically, the book notes that if either the debate or the meeting is adjourned without the committee taking a decision, which is what happened, the committee may resume debate any time afterwards at another meeting. Now, my question to the clerk really, and this is not to be, to be obstreperous or to be sort of obstructionist. I'm really trying to understand if that is where we were. Should we not be going back to the original speaking list?
Well, if you wish, I can start with Ms. Thomas.
No,
who's
I'm
up
just
right
the
now.
original speaking list from the last meeting. That's what I'm asking about.
Yeah, I've got it right in front of me.
Right, I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm just curious, process-wise, if that's what we should be doing. I don't know.
Here's the adjourned or suspended. We were adjourned, so we start a new list.
Okay, fine. I'm
That's
just curious.
my
I was asking a process
interpretation.
question. That's all.
That would be Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for reading out the motion. I do not have a record of it, your sub-amendment saying Meta and Google and other platforms. Meta and Google receive over $1 billion, just those two companies. I don't recall and other platforms because that would that exponentially increases the massive government indirect subsidies that go to these companies. But I don't have a record of those three words appearing. That Meta and Google receive over $1 billion in indirect subsidies is absolutely appropriate, and that was in my amendment.
Yeah. The clerk is going to explain to you the difference. We just had your amendment, sub-amendment, your amendment, my sub-amendment. Okay? Clear? Ms. Thomas, the floor is yours. And we're speaking to the sub-amendment here, if you don't mind me saying, from Tuesday.
Sure. The amendment, which has now been amended, and then sub-amendment that is before this committee, has to do with the CBC. Mr. Julian then added also Meta and Google. The intent of the sub-amendment being discussed would be that Ms. Tate, the head of the CBC, would be brought forward to this committee and that she would be given opportunity to answer for decisions that she has made. Further to that, there would be a desire to hear from Mr. Atchie, who is responsible for journalistic standards and who has instructed those at the CBC not to use the word terrorist when referring to Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. Further to that, there is also desire to hear from Mr. Nagler, who is also a part of the leadership team at the CBC. He serves as the ombudsman. And so, of course, these three combined would hopefully be able to offer this committee some answers as to why they're making the decisions that they are. What I find alarming is that the CBC is spreading dangerous disinformation promoted by Hamas, and they put it out there as if it's fact. Just a week ago, they said that the Gaza hospital was bombed by Israel and that hundreds were dead, when in fact we now have intelligence from Canada's National Defence and Intelligence Command. We also have verification from the United States, from France, and from the United Kingdom saying that is false. And yet the CBC has not offered an apology for their spreading of dangerous disinformation. Dangerous disinformation that actually feeds into anti-Semitic beliefs and behavior in this country. When taxpayers are putting $1.4 billion toward a machine that is spreading disinformation, that's wrong.
Point of order from Ms.
I'm
Hefner.
not sure that this is accurate based on the
This is not a
CBC
point of
coverage
order. This
that
is a
I've
point
seen.
of
I'm wondering
debate.
if the member opposite can
That's
provide
debate.
the
That's
articles that she's
debate.
concerned about.
That's debate. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
So what we see at this committee is we see the cover-up coalition, which is a combination of the NDP member, Mr. Julian, and the Liberal members, and they are wanting to shut
Point of order,
down
Mr. Chair.
debate.
Mr. Noor Mohammed, point of order.
Ms. Thomas is now calling out specific members of this committee for their work by name, which is not only entirely inappropriate, it's inaccurate, but it's also entirely unprofessional. So perhaps, Mr. Chair, you might ask her to not do that.
Continue, Ms. Thomas, if you wish, on the sub-amendment put forward
point
by
of order.
Kevin Waugh, if you don't mind. Go ahead, Mr. Julian, on a point of order.
I would ask you to caution all members about being respectful, and you recall, Mr. Chair, that the Speaker actually ruled on this, that the name calling in the House of Commons is inappropriate. It's inappropriate at committee as well. So the Speaker has already ruled on this, and I would ask through you that all members treat each other with respect.
I agree. Can we all get along for a little while here and deal with the sub-amendment, if we don't mind? Ms. Thomas, you've started, and we have a speaking list here, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, before I resume my comments, I would comment on that point of order first. I referred to Mr. Julian as Mr. Julian. Now, at the last meeting, I accidentally used his first name and I said Peter Julian, at which point he took great offense and raised it. I offered an apology and he forgave me, which I'm thankful for. Today, I'm calling him Mr. Julian, as was his request, and I believe is respectful to do. He's now saying that I'm calling him names. So I'm curious, if he doesn't want me to call him Peter Julian, and now he doesn't want me to call him Mr. Julian, what would he like me to call him?
Point of order.
Mr. Julian.
The Speaker's reference, and I know Mrs. Thomas is well aware of this, was to the use of derogatory names towards political parties, whether it's the NDP or any other party.
Okay.
It is not she's quite right to point out that she apologized for her remarks in the last meeting. I have definitely forgiven her, and I appreciate that she has been referring to me by
Well, I have too,
my family
Mr.
name.
Julian, if you don't mind me saying. I'm also at fault. I've been calling people by first names. And
no,
so I was
Mr.
taken
Chair,
back
Mr.
last
Chair,
week.
Mr. Chair, you know what the committee practice is. And you also know what the Speaker's ruling was.
Yep.
The Speaker's ruling was not to use derogatory terms connected
That's
to
right.
any caucus. And so that is why I'm asking you to ensure that there are no derogatory names either directed personally, which is not the case here, or towards a party caucus.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Julian. I did go back on Hansard several times last year. We called each other first names. So I'm just bringing this forward. It was just a point I'm making.
Mr. Chair,
and now
that is something that has already been resolved.
Yeah.
Mrs. Thomas has already apologized,
Yeah.
and I've forgiven her. That is not the issue here, and I would like you to please stay on point. The question is whether
trying
you
to.
can use derogatory comments about any party caucus, and that is what I'm asking you to enforce. As the Speaker ruled in the House, this is something that should be maintained in committee.
Okay, Ms. Thomas, go ahead.
I wonder if the honourable member then could help me understand what was the derogatory term that was used.
Mr. Julian.
Mrs. Thomas is well aware. The Speaker ruled on that during question period, the use of derogatory terms towards any party caucus, including the NDP. I'm sure she can make her point without being derogatory, and I would ask you simply to enforce that rule.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas, with the sub-amendment, if you don't mind.
So before I was interrupted, I was making the exact point that my dear colleague is proving true, which is to say that the Liberals and the NDPs have joined forces in order to try to bring this debate to an end. Because they very much want to defend the CBC. They very much want to defend the spreading of disinformation. They very much want to defend the dangerous conduct that the CBC has engaged in by actually propagating a message that was put out there by Hamas. And the CBC put that message out there as if it is fact. And this committee, the members within the Liberal and the NDP caucus at this committee, have determined that they do not wish to have this conversation and that they do not wish to have the CBC held to account. And that's shameful. Because Canadians deserve better. They deserve
Point of order,
accurate
Mr.
news
Chair.
coverage.
Point of order, and before we get on, we have a hard stop at 10:15. I just heard from the clerk, okay? Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
Yes, I certainly would disagree with Mrs. Thomas that we should be turning the committee into hell, which was what her comments were last time. Could you please confirm, Mr. Chair, that the president of CBC is actually coming before this committee next week? Because I think that is very germane to this discussion in the sub-amendment, that as president of CBC is already confirmed, as Ms. Gladue was kind enough to confirm. Next week, she will be coming to committee. Could you confirm that,
Yes.
please?
Thank you, Mr. Julian. You know the sub-amendment was for 2 hours, and that's why we're discussing the sub-amendment. You know as well as everyone around here, as of Tuesday, she is logged in for next Thursday for 1 hour. Now, the sub-amendment is a little different, as you know, Mr. Julian. We're asking her for 2 hours. So that's why we're on this sub-amendment with Ms. Thomas having the floor right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my honourable NDP colleague proves my point that, in fact, the Liberals and the NDP at this committee are, in fact, trying to prevent the CBC from having to come forward as these three members, Mr. Negler,
Point of
Mr.
order,
Atchie,
Mr.
and
Chair?
Ms. Tate.
Point of order.
Mr. Julian.
Could you please confirm yet again, Mr. Chair, that the president of CBC is coming next week?
Yes, she is coming. Catherine Tate is coming next Thursday for 1 hour, confirmed. Thank you. But we're dealing with a sub-amendment, if you don't mind, Mr. Julian. Things have moved with Ms. Tate, as you know, and I was surprised, actually, that the chair last Tuesday said it's open warfare on Ms. Tate. We can also talk about other things, because we wanted to talk specifically about the CBC, which the chair interpreted, it's now wide open. Point of order. Ms. Gladue.
Chair, Mr. Julian brought forward that the Speaker had provided rules to try to improve the decorum, and one of the things that was in those guidelines that he brought forward was we shouldn't be chronically interrupting. And the number of points of order that we're seeing from Mr. Julian while my colleague, Ms. Thomas, is trying to speak does look like excessive interruption. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Gladue. So again, Catherine Tate will be here on behalf of the CBC next Thursday for 1 hour.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
For 1 hour. Yes, Mr.
I want to clarify two things. One is that the chair did not use the term open warfare last meeting.
No, she didn't.
I think it's
right.
important not
I
to
would agree with
mischaracterize.
that. Yeah. It's open discussion.
And number two, if you could clarify for this committee that members can ask witnesses the questions that they want to ask.
That was the interpretation of the chair last Tuesday.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Thomas.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Yes, Mr. Coteau. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just ask. I know that this meeting has been very challenging, but I would like to ask you as the chair to ensure that if members are repeating themselves, that you hold them accountable. We don't have, we don't have a lot of time, and we have an important study that speaks to issues that this entire committee was committed to. And that was the health and well-being of our athletes here in Canada. And I do believe that, the issues that MP Thomas is bringing up around CBC and accountability, these are issues that MPs should be able to ask the CEO of CBC. So it would be, I will vote in favor of asking CBC to come to the committee. So MP Thomas can ask those questions, but, the constant repeating of the same point, it doesn't really allow us to do our work. And that at the bottom line, at the end of the day, is to finish this report that speaks, to many examples of athletes being exploited here in Canada. And we have a duty as MPs to make sure that this report is put forward, voted on, and reported back to the House. So thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas, with your points on the sub-amendment, please.
It's interesting to me that the members opposite are prescribing what this committee has a responsibility to do. While I don't disagree, I would also raise the fact that this committee has the responsibility to hold the CBC to account with regard to telling the truth. The CBC is under the parameters of Heritage Canada. This committee is the Heritage Committee. And therefore, as members of this committee, we have the responsibility to hold the CBC, the public broadcaster within this country, to account. And if the CBC is reporting false information, dangerous disinformation that is causing significant harm, then the CBC has the responsibility to answer for that decision and to answer for the impact that that decision has had on Canadians, and in particular on the Jewish community. So for this committee, let me be very clear, for the Liberal members and the NDP member of this committee to try to block for Ms. Tate.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr.
If you might clarify for what I think mathematically is the umpteenth time that A, the CBC chair, the CEO, that Catherine Tate from CBC is coming, and that members can ask her whatever their heart desires, please. Yes. So that Ms. Thomas can disabuse herself of this notion that somehow that's not what people want.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Point of order, Mr. Julian.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, you'll recall I was a member around this table during the Harper regime, and
what does that have to do with what we're discussing here?
I'm coming back to that. Numerous times when I was speaking, Conservatives would point to the issue of relevance. And that is, of course, relevance and repetition are the two elements around any filibuster. And so I would question both the relevance and the repetition here. When we are talking about the sub-amendment, it is important to stick to the sub-amendment, and it is also important to ensure that there isn't repetition. We know that Ms. Tate is coming next week, and so that kind of drive-by comment is simply inappropriate. It's not relevant. The question that you raised, Mr. Chair, is a very valid one. Should she be coming for 2 hours? I think that's worthy of debate. Let's have that debate.
That is debate. Okay, Ms. Thomas, go ahead.
To the committee, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm seeing the members of the Liberal Party and the NDP member, and they're consistently interrupting me and finding fault with the fact that I'm talking about Ms. Tate coming to this committee, the head of the CBC. And yet that is the very core of the sub-amendment that we're talking about. So on the one hand, I am being berated by my colleagues at this table for talking about Ms. Tate coming to this committee and how that's so important. And then I'm also being berated on this other side for needing to stick to the sub-amendment. And so here I am, stuck in this interesting place, which brings me to the conclusion. This is just a nonsensical way for the Liberal and NDP members of this committee to try to stop the discussion, to try to stop my comments. Because they do not want the truth to be told. They do not want the truth exposed. They do not want to acknowledge that the CBC is spreading disinformation that is dangerous in nature. The CBC published an article with this title, "Hundreds Killed in Israeli Airstrike on Gaza City Hospital, Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza says." Let's be clear, the Palestinian Health Ministry is run by Hamas. So for the CBC to release an article with intel that they received from Hamas is absolutely inappropriate. And then it was found and has been confirmed by the Prime Minister of Canada, the Minister of National Defence, the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and France, that this is a false narrative that the CBC has been spreading, that it is in fact dangerous disinformation that feeds into anti-Semitism in this country. It is wrong. And this committee has the responsibility to hold the CBC leadership to account. For the members of this committee to try to backstop the leader of that organization is absolutely horrendous. It's despicable. This is the spreading of dangerous disinformation that has had a massive impact on people in Canada. And we're talking about a public broadcaster that is paid to the tune of $1.4 billion from the Canadian taxpayer. Surely this committee can do its job. And surely the members of the Liberal caucus and the member of the NDP caucus who are trying to disrupt at this committee, perhaps they could just have the decency to have the conversation and to allow Ms. Tate to come forward for 2 hours along with her leadership team and to answer the questions that need to be answered.
Point of order.
Mr. Julian is interrupting me again on a point of order.
Yes, he is. Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
I disagree with the profound disinformation, and that is not relevant to the sub-amendment. The sub-amendment is the 2 hours versus the 1 hour. And I think that's a worthy debate, and I appreciated you offering it as a sub-amendment, Mr. Chair. But the comments are not relevant to the sub-amendment. Ms. Tate is coming. She's coming before committee. And I would ask you to enforce that rule of relevance so that the comments are on whether a 2 hour as opposed to a 1 hour time frame is appropriate.
Good. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. To be clear, the sub-amendment is very specific about the reason that Ms. Tate would be coming to this committee. It is not the addition of an hour to the already standing commitment, but rather it is an entirely new purpose that she would be asked to come. It also reads that there are 2 other individuals on her leadership team who would also be required to come, Mr. Negler and Mr. Achi. So again, for the members opposite, along with the NDP member, to try to shut this down.
Point of order.
Mr. Julian.
I again question relevance. The reality is in my amendment, it very clearly refers to the other 2 individuals, and we know that Ms. Tate is coming next week. So the accusations, the comments are not relevant to the sub-amendment.
Ms. Thomas, go ahead. I think the confusion is, if you don't mind me saying, we had booked in Catherine Tate before all the issues that we have seen the last 2 weeks out of the CBC newsreel. And the sub-amendment we're dealing with is concerning the reporting out of the Gaza since the conflict has started between Hamas and Israel. And yes, we're dealing with the sub-amendment, but this is where we've crossed the line. We had Tate coming regardless, and now we've asked her for actually the 2 hours coming because things have developed. As you know, Mr. Julian, things have developed over the last 2 weeks that were kind of, really, is this what's happening? So that's why your amendment, my sub-amendment, included the CBC because of the issues that has happened with the reporting of the public broadcaster. So, Ms. Thomas, if you don't mind, continue on the sub-amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. According to the sub-amendment, and I'll read the exact wording here. It says that the committee invite Rachel Curran, head of public policy, Meta Canada, to come before the committee and summon the president of the CBC, Catherine Tate, to appear for 2 hours by herself within 7 days of the motion being adopted. That the committee invite the CBC Director of Journalistic Standards, George Achi, and the CBC Ombudsman, Jack Nagler, to appear separately for a minimum of an hour and a half each to address the CBC's position on journalistic standards and practices. One of those journalistic standards and practices is that they refuse to call Hamas a terrorist organization. Now, this is despite the fact that Hamas has been listed by Canada as a terrorist organization since 2002. That's more than 20 years. And so for the CBC to make this decision is absolutely irresponsible, and it is to peddle disinformation, and it is to be on the side of Hamas, which is to be on the side of terrorists, which is to be against the Jewish population.
Rappel au
which is
règlement, Monsieur le
wrong.
Président.
Mr. Shampoo?
Monsieur le Président, ce sont des accusations et des commentaires qui sont
Chair, these are extremely serious accusations and comments about the public broadcaster. I invite her through you to be cautious in her choice of words because this can cause a lot of harm and harm the credibility of the public broadcaster. So I think that we've discussed this. I think that there's repetition in Ms. Thomas's comments, and if these could be limited, we could perhaps pursue the debate and have other people speak. But I would invite colleagues to be extremely cautious in their choice of words because words have consequences. And we're talking about an information source of public source of information, and which is being attacked on credibility regarding opinions and not facts. Thank you.
Monsieur.
Point of order, Chair.
Mr. Julian?
À mon avis, vous devrez.
In my opinion, you must remove the speaking right of Ms. Thomas. She's not respecting the rules. There are journalists whose lives are in peril, and these accusations are extremely serious and insincere. This week, she said that she wanted to make this committee hell on earth. And in my opinion, these are absolutely disgraceful comments, and she should apologize to all journalists. You can disagree with certain points, but the allegations that she has just made are terrible allegations, and these threaten the lives of journalists.
To both of you, and thank you, Mr. Shampoo, being a former journalist. So thank you for your comments. Ms. Thomas, continue on if you don't mind.
I wish the members of this committee cared enough about the lives of innocent Jewish individuals.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Noor Mohammed.
We have now sat through Ms. Thomas saying that we are on the side of terrorists, all of us. We have sat through Ms. Thomas saying that we don't care about the Jewish community. I am very proud to represent the Jewish community in Vancouver, the institution of the Jewish community in my writing, and I take great responsibility, and it means the world to me that they have chosen to have me as their member of parliament. What she is doing, if I may finish, Mr. Chair, is not only casting aspersions on the intentions of members of this committee, but what she is also doing, perhaps wittingly, perhaps unwittingly, I don't know what she's thinking, is to foment a remarkable amount of discord in communities where we already have a lot of anxiety. It is not helpful, Mr. Chair, and it is extremely dangerous.
Point of order, Ms. Gladue.
Chair, while respecting the point that we all need to get to a better place, I think that was debate.
Okay, thank you. We've got a speaking list. Hopefully we can get through most of it, if not all of it, here between the hard stop at 10:15. Ms. Thomas, continue. We got Mr. Malello, Mr. Julian, Mr. Koto, Mr. Noor Mohammed, and Ms. Hepner on the speaking list. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
The point is simple. The CBC itself said that to call Hamas terrorists was to take sides. So if they're not going to call the Hamas a terrorist organization, are they not left taking a side still?
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Shampoo?
Monsieur le Président, je rappelle que...
Chair, the allegations that Ms. Thomas is making are extremely serious. Mr. Julian said it earlier. There are journalists in the field, and to imply that any media journalists, whether they be at CBC, Radio-Canada or not, are on the side of the terrorist is putting their safety at risk and their integrity at risk, and these words are serious and have serious consequences. I ask Ms. Thomas to retract her words and withdraw her words and choose her words more wisely, because this is major disinformation that could seriously harm journalists who are doing their job on site.
Mr. Shampoo, Ms. Thomas, continue if you don't mind.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. You do need to ask Mrs. Thomas to retract what are serious allegations that put the lives of journalists that already are in incredibly dangerous situations, put them in peril. These are not comments that can be excused. We can't turn the page. She has made unbelievably horrific allegations. She needs to retract. She needs to apologize. And I would suggest, Mr. Chair, you have the power from this committee to go to someone else so that she can
Thomas, would you apologize?
collect. But I would ask you for her to apologize to all of the journalists that she has just put in incredible danger.
Ms. Thomas? You've been asked to apologize.
I have the article in front of me. I'd be happy to read it into the record in its entirety. And I believe if I were to do so, it would show that the CBC did, in fact,
Point of order,
take
Mr. Chair.
information at their own admission
Point of
directly
order,
from
Mr.
Hamas
Chair.
and put it out to the Canadian
of
public
order,
as if
Mr.
it is
Chair.
fact. I do not retract my statement.
Okay, Mr. Noor Mohammed?
Well, I think Ms. Thomas has now spoken for herself. I suppose she's not retracting her statement, so she's not taking you up on the offer to apologize to the committee, or to the, more importantly, to journalists. This is now not only repetitive, this is inflammatory, and the consequences of these types of comments, Mr. Chair, I would ask you, as the chair of this committee today, to take very seriously what Mr. Champoux, Mr. Julian, what I and others in this committee are saying and feeling, because this is a very, very serious line of misinformation that Ms. Thomas has chosen to peddle to get clips. This is not what this committee should be about. People's lives are literally hanging in the balance over every word people are saying, not just abroad, but in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Noor Mohammed. Go ahead, Ms.
Mr.
Thomas.
Chair, I would ask you that you give the next person on the list the ability to speak. Could you rule on that, please?
Ms. Thomas, are you just about ready to wrap up? I do have Mr. Malalo and Mr. Julian next on the list.
Chair, I'm not asking you. She has not retracted. She has not apologized. She has made incendiary allegations against journalists. I would ask you that you give the speaking rule to the next person. And if you rule to the contrary, I'm prepared to move the appropriate challenge to your ruling.
Well, Ms. Thomas, you do have the floor. I wish you would wrap up.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I would challenge
All right.
your ruling on this. I believe that her allegations are
All right, we'll call for the vote then.
unbelievably inappropriate, and her time speaking should be suspended. She has caused disorder in this committee.
Yeah. Could you explain, Mr. Julian, what would you like me to challenge again? Is that the challenge?
She has provoked disorder by her incendiary comments about journalists. She has been repetitive, and she has not been relevant to what is before. You've called her repeatedly on this. You've asked her to apologize. She has refused. There is order that must be maintained in the committee. I would ask you that maintain it by simply passing to the next person on the list, who I believe is Mr. Melo. That's the decision I'm asking you to take.
Chair, it's 10:15, so I...
It's actually not. I have 10:11, Sorry, I have 4 minutes after all. That clock is
I move to
fast.
suspend the meeting. Can I do that?
Well, no, you can't. Yeah. Anyway. Just give me 30 seconds if you don't mind. So because we are limited to time, let me say this before we do, in fact, adjourn for the day, that next Tuesday, October 31st, let me read this into the record if you guys don't mind, that on Tuesday, October 31st, we hear from Jean-Francois Bellet, who is on his appointment as Director of National Gallery of Canada, and to continue reviewing the Safe Sport report to be confirmed based on the outcome of the meeting's debate. So I did want to say this prior to, at the end of the meeting, and it's up to the chair when she comes back next week, but I did want to, that was on our schedule for next Tuesday, and I just wanted everyone around the table to expect that, where today when we came, we thought we were going to get the chair of the CRTC, and then we didn't get it for some reason. So for Tuesday, we are expecting to hear from Jean-Francois for 1 hour here in committee. So, Ms. Thomas, we're back to you. Time is running out. You've been asked
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I did ask you for a ruling on this.
Yeah, you're challenging the chair.
No, I've asked you for a ruling. You haven't given it yet.
Well, I'm asking Ms. Thomas if she would apologize.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I asked. If you would withdraw some of the remarks that you have made to journalists, and then we could proceed, if you don't mind.
I haven't made any comments to journalists, but I have referenced an article that was written by the CBC on October 17th, entitled "Hundreds Killed in Israeli Airstrike on Gaza City Hospital, Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza Says." And I talked about what is stated in that article. It's an article written by the
Point of order.
and to this committee, if that is uncomfortable for them what the CBC has said, that's unfortunate. But I don't retract a true statement based on the article the CBC wrote.
Monsieur le Président, rappel au règlement. D'abord,
Chair. Point of order. First of all, these are not Mrs. Thomas's words. She specifically associated CBC with Hamas. And she was not quoting the article saying that she's coming back with the article now to justify herself, but it doesn't justify anything. The point, Chair, is, as Mr. Julian asked you to apply a decision to withdraw Ms. Thomas's right to speak, and this is the decision for which he's asked for a decision from you.
Yeah, I'm being challenged, so I'll bring it to a vote. Can I do that? Okay, bring it to a vote.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just point of order. I'd like you to read into the record what is exactly the challenge, what has gone on here before we move to that vote, just so that we can have a full understanding.
Mr. Julian?
Chair, yeah, she has violated the standards that committees are supposed to adhere to. She's
Point of order.
refused to apologize.
Point of
The
order.
member has
Point of
refused
order.
to
Point of order.
apologize
Point of order.
for comments
This is not a point of
that
order.
put
This is
people
debate right now.
in-
Mr. Chair,
in
you
a
have to go
dangerous
immediately to a
position.
vote.
She has as well repeated herself and
Chair.
not been relevant in
Hold on,
speaking to
everyone.
the
Not a
sub-amendment.
point of order.
So
Hold on,
on that basis, yes, I believe you
Thank
have
you,
the
Mr.
right
Julian.
to pass
Seeing
the
clock
speaking
is
turn
at
to the next Conservative member.
10:15, could I have someone adjourn? Thank you, Mr. Norm Mohammed. Thank you.